Segment 4 of Chapter 8, which included pages 253 to 260, first started off by talking about how the reign of pain is mainly in the brain. So it mentions neuropathic pain, which is pain caused by damage to the peripheral nerves and is often difficult to treat. And an example of this type of pain is phantom limb pain, which is where you feel pain in a limb that is non-existent anymore. Either it was amputated, and this pain also may be called neuralgia, which the text uses often as it continues in the chapter. And this pain seems to be due by inappropriate signaling of pain by neurons rather than to tissue damage itself. And after a peripheral nerve injury, microglial cells surround the synapses between pain fibers and neurons in the dorsal horn of the spinal cord, and these dorsal horn neurons become chronically active and flood the thalamus with action potentials, which signals pain. The effects of chronic pain on the brain include gray matter in the prefrontal cortex of people with chronic back pain shrinks faster than in normal aging people. And as I mentioned before, phantom limb is kind of a unique syndrome and thus notoriously hard to treat, but a visual illusion method has been developed to treat it, and it involves the activation of the cingulate cortex, which is implicated in many other types of pain as, again, the chapter continues. And another demonstration of the role of the brain when it comes to pain is migraines, which are intense headaches typically felt on one side of the head that can recur regularly and be difficult to treat. Besides there being neuropathic pain and physical pain, the text also mentioned that another form of pain that most people don't really consider physical is social rejection. So several findings have indicated that social rejection also can activate the anterior cingulate cortex, and that the extent to which a person is upset by rejection correlates with activation of this region. So if social rejection activates the same emotional pain as physical damage, the question arises, can the same drugs that relieve the affective discomfort of physical ills also relieve the pain of rejection? And the text's answer is yes. So the participants in the study that were given Tylenol felt less hurt feelings than those who were given a placebo. And they also showed less activation of the cingulate cortex. The next major section talks about how pain can be difficult to control because simply cutting the axons that signal pain would take care of the pain, but this may reduce pain perception only temporarily and have not really a good long-term effect. But several strategies can help alleviate the pain, and some of these major strategies to control pain include opiate drugs, placebos, acupuncture, and stress. So the first method to reduce pain is through the use of opiate drugs. So opium has been used for reduction of pain for centuries, and from that, a class of drugs has developed called opiates, and these are drugs that are related or derived from opium and exert similar effects like reduced pain sensitivity. The major opiate drug that we all probably can think of is morphine. So modern researchers have found that the brain contains natural opiate-like substances called opioids, and the brain modulates pain by releasing substances that work the same way as exogenous opioids, called endogenous opioids. And There are three major classes of these. They are a family of peptide transmitters that are commonly called the body's own narcotics. And so the three types of endogenous opioids include endorphins, enkephalins, and dynorphins. And several opioid receptors have also been identified, and these receptors respond to both endogenous and exogenous opioids. So researchers have suggested that pain is subject to many modulating influences, including some that can close some spinal gates, controlling the flow of pain information from the spinal cord to the brain. And it has been found that the electrical stimulation of the periaqueductal gray, which is a region in the midbrain and brainstem that connects the third and fourth ventricles to each other, it's been found that when stimulated, it produces potent analgesia, pain reduction, and neurons from the periaqueductal gray send endorphin-containing axons to stimulate the medulla, which sends axons to the spinal cord, and ultimately stimulating neurons to release opioids. And so there are ascending and descending pain pathways. So pain sensation is projected up to the brain, but the brain can inhibit these signals to control pain, thus descending. So to avoid the side effects of these painkillers like confusion, drowsiness, vomiting, constipation, etc., all those lovely stuff that you probably hear on commercials for drugs, in order to avoid these, small doses are administered directly to the spinal cord. Very, very small doses, and these methods are slightly invasive and thus restricted to cases of surgery, childbirth, or severe chronic pain. And they could be administered either epidurally, which is just outside the spinal cord's dura mater, or intrathecally, which is between the dura mater and the spinal cord. And the text also mentions at the end of the section that fears of addiction to painkillers after surgery are kind of unwarranted, even though that was the common misconception throughout history. And today's modern medical standards emphasize aggressive treatment to stop chronic pain before it even starts using these painkillers. And the text also mentions marijuana, which is the dried leaves and flowers from the plant Cannabis sativa, which is typically smoked to obtain THC, the main ingredient for a psychoactive effect. And this reduces pain by stimulating the cannabinoid receptors in the spinal cord and nerve endings. And the text also poses the question if topical creams are possible for or targeting the cannabinoid receptors in your skin. The next major method of pain reduction is the placebo effect, and a placebo is an ineffective or inert substance that has no obvious direct physiological effect, but when administered like a drug, it can sometimes bring relief, depends on the person. Some people respond, while others do not at all. And functional brain imaging indicates that opioids and placebos activate the same brain regions when the placebos do work, that is, and that both treatments can reduce the activity of neural regions responding to pain, i.e. the cingulate cortex and the spinal cord. It is also important to note that endogenous opioids have been implicated in the placebo effect because when given naloxone, which is an antagonist of opiates, in addition to the placebo, patients did not experience pain relief. But some things can enhance the effect of the placebo, including external and internal environmental cues. For example, verbal suggestions that the drug will make you feel better will raise expectations for the effectiveness of the placebo, of the drug that's not actually a drug, that is a placebo, and thus it can raise the actual effectiveness of it. And the final two methods that the text mentions is acupuncture and stress. So for the first one, acupuncture, which is the insertion of needles at designated points on the skin in an attempt to alleviate pain or physiological malfunctions or altered behavior. And the earliest description of this is at least 3,000 years old, so it's been used throughout history, but only some people achieve continued relief from pain as a result of this, and it's probably at least partly due to some placebo effect. And the last final method, well, not really method, but the final factor that the text mentions is stress. So sometimes people badly hurt in traumatic circumstances report little or no immediate pain. And researchers have examined pain inhibition that arises in stress and have found that brain systems produce analgesia, which is pain reduction, when pain threatens to overwhelm effective coping strategies. And opioid-sensitive analgesic system has also been implicated. The final section of the text, entitled Evolving an Indifference to Toxins, takes into account a small case study of mice and the bark scorpions and shows how a discovery made from this case could potentially mean that researchers have another target for relieving pain. So natural selection can also produce novel compounds, in this case for causing pain instead of reducing it. And it takes into account the case of the grasshopper mouse and the bark scorpion. So humans find the sting of the scorpion very painful because scorpions have evolved a toxin that selectively activates the same gene that is implicated in pain, NAV17, that drives pain fibers to fire. And lab mice also find this sting painful, but grasshopper mice that live in the same environment naturally as the scorpions do not seem to mind it, and that sensory cells are inhibited rather than activated by the toxin. So under further inspection, researchers have found that the toxin blocks a second channel in the grasshopper mice called NAV18, which allows the prolonged effect of a sting that we normally feel. So the toxin blocks it instead of activates it. And this discovery of the channel can potentially mean that researchers have another target for relieving pain.